Well, what a mess. We had a major failure here on our, well, not a major one, but close enough. And if you remember back in part 10 video, I believe it was, I had reassembled our gearbox with a gear lube from Hobby Lube. That's this stuff. And I thought it would work quite well because it was very sticky and would stick to the gears. But what I forgot to allow for was the temperature rise inside a gearbox. I wasn't thinking about that too much. There's a lot of friction amongst these gears here. So what happened was, she was running fine, and then she started getting slower and slower until she ground to a halt. And I kept giving it more power, thinking my track was dirty or something, but she ground to a halt, and she just froze up like that, never to run again. Or so I thought. But anyway, what happened was, this gear lube is fine for exposed gears, such as along the sides of a diesel locomotive or something, you know, post-war, where you can actually see the gears, where they're not contained within a gearbox. But within a gearbox, you're going to get temperatures real high. And what happened was, this thing froze up, and I'm not sure if it was the worm shaft here or if it was the bushing. But what I did was, I took this all apart. I cleaned out all that Hobby Lube. After it cooled down, I couldn't even touch this thing, it was so hot. And so I took it all apart and cleaned out the Hobby Lube and brought in our bearing grease. This is from Napa, but this is made for high temperatures and low friction, wheel bearings and all that kind of thing. So a lot of friction, a lot of heat buildup. This will dissipate the heat a lot better and than the gear lube. This stuff thinned out so much that it was actually dripping from underneath the locomotive out of the bottom of the gearbox. That's why we have Jack here. He's looking at our drive gear, making sure it's all right. And I got Carl over here. He's bringing in the good grease so we continue filling up our gearbox. Carl knows these things. He should have told me before I put the locomotive together, but he was missing in action for some reason. But here he is, bringing our grease for us. In any event, we got to get this back together now. I thought I'd show you too. Get Carl out of the way here. I think Jack's done with his work. He can take a break too. All right, so let's flip our chassis over here. What I did on this is I added a quick connect to the LEDs here. So I combined all our LEDs into one quick connect and added it to our frame and to our hot wire there. So we're all set with that. Now the other part of this is, let's disconnect our crane. I'll lower that. All right. Okay. Got the locomotive and the crane out of the way. So on our shell here, if you remember, I couldn't take this apart without getting the wires out of the hole that they drilled. So I'd have to disconnect all the wiring just to remove the shell. So what I did is I routed out this piece on our shell here that attaches to the back of the chassis there. And now I can just pull this whole shell off, and we got a good situation right there. All right. And then there's a closer look of the quick connector I used. That's the male end, and then the female's over here. All right. So just tidying up after all the work we did on this puppy. All right. So that's all done. And then back to our gearbox here. What happened when it seized up, this drive shaft I had made up, and what happened was it just totally destroyed it. When it seized up, this thing just started unwinding, and our heat shrink just wasn't enough to keep it all in one place. So she's kind of destroyed. The spring unwound quite a bit, and so we're not going to use that anymore. But what I did do was I went back to our RC car universal joint there, and we're going to check this out again. Now that I have the screw holes moved backwards a little bit on the motor, I gained more room to put this on, which gives me more distance before it reaches the gearbox. And if I put this on the very end of that shaft, we should be in good shape without any buckling at our universal joint here on our drive shaft. So we're going to try that. So like I say, we've got our wheel bearing and grease all packed in here now nicely. I actually had to put this, let me zoom back up, well, I could stay there. I actually had to put the shaft, the bushings, and our worm gear in the freezer for about an hour, because this one seized up on the shaft. So then I took it out of the freezer, and I just real quickly hit this one with a cigarette lighter, a Bic lighter, and it was enough to pop it loose from the shaft as it expanded. So we got it good now. It's turning freely, so we're okay. We should be all right. We'll see. We're going to test it in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put this all back together with the right kind of grease. I really should have thought of that, but I didn't think it would heat up that much that it would cause that kind of a problem. But you live, you learn, you move on. All right, so we learned from that mistake, and we'll go with the nice temperature dispersing grease here, and we'll see what we can do. Okay, we got her all back together, and I got her up on the rollers once again. A little noisy up there on those rollers, but that's all right. But as you can see, we've got the drive shaft there. Now I'm just catching the very end of each shaft, the end of the motor shaft and the end of the gearbox shaft, and that gives us more room. Plus I had moved the bracket back one hole to give us more room. So I think we're going to be good this way, and well, we'll give it a try and see what happens, and wish me luck. Running good backwards. Running good frontwards. I have the tender running at this time instead of a DC power supply. I'm just going to let this keep running here for a while. Check the temperature of the gearbox. Right now it's lukewarm, but it's only been running for a couple minutes. So I'm going to let it run for probably about an hour, frontwards and backwards. Half hour front, half hour back. And bring our man Carl back in here. Let him keep an eye on everything. He was the man with the great grease. So. Let's see. Alright, about 5:30 we'll put it in reverse and we'll check our temperatures again. I'll be back. Okay, here we are a half hour later. She's warm but not screaming hot. Alright, so we're going to put her in reverse for a half an hour. Carl's happy. Says, Jimmy, use the right stuff and you'll be happy. Alright, let's put her in reverse here. Oh, sorry. Alright, we'll let that run for a half hour. We'll check it again. Okay guys, half hour later. Still running. Warm, but not so hot you can't touch it. Carl gives me the thumbs up. He thinks we're in good shape. So I'm going to put it down on the rails and see how she does. Alright, let's see how we're doing here. Let me get my wire out of the way. Get our front truck back on. Alright. Doing pretty good. Very good. All right, I'll put her back together and we should be okay. So, moral of this story is, don't use the hobby lube in a gearbox. It's just too much friction and it won't dissipate the heat as much as you need it to. So we're in good shape now. It's touchable. It's warm, but it's touchable. The motor's warm, but touchable. Everything's fine. You need that grease to dissipate the heat, the heavier grease there. I think we're in good shape. Now I can put her back together. Alright, so that's it for this episode. Just wanted to warn you about not using the gear lube for the gearbox. You need something heavier. And our new drive shaft, it's actually working now that I moved that bracket backwards, so I'm happy about that.